All right, you guys up for a history lesson? Let's talk about the Cowboys and Steelers. I'm sitting here in my hotel room in Pittsburgh, and this is just kind of spinning through my mind and some of the stuff that I've researched over the years. And I wanted to share some of it with you guys because you may not be aware of it and may not be aware of the foundation of what this rivalry is. Because I think for a lot of people, they know exactly what the Cowboys-Steelers rivalry is. They've met in the Super Bowl 3 times. It's the most common Super Bowl matchup we've seen in the history of the NFL. It's probably the biggest interconference rivalry in professional sports outside of Celtics-Lakers, if you want to take a look at it that way. But a lot of this started, actually, the foundation for it was built all the way back in 1960. And 1960 was the first year of the Cowboys as a franchise, obviously. And they were playing their first game on September 24th, 1960 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the Steelers, they had existed for 27 years, and they were not anything special. They'd been to the playoffs once. They had never won a playoff game. And over the last 14 years leading up to the 1960 season, they were a 500 or a little below type of football team. And so when you have a brand new franchise in the Cowboys who got a lot of aging veterans, even guys who were big names, they were past their prime when they opened their expansion team. What you essentially got that first day was an expansion team devoid of top talent versus the NFL's version of purgatory. It doesn't sound that interesting, but these first 2 years that the Cowboys and Steelers played each other was actually a really strong foundation for the rivalry that would ensue. So in 1960, when the Cowboys welcomed the Steelers to the Cotton Bowl, which even for those outside of Dallas, you should be familiar with the Cotton Bowl, pretty historic venue. The Cowboys that day weren't really much of a home team. And it's not because there was a big Pittsburgh contingency here in DFW. But Dallas was a new franchise. Not a lot of fan base support built up right away, obviously. And so the rooting interest that day didn't lie specifically with the Steelers. It lied more specifically with their quarterback, Bobby Lane. Now, if you don't know who Bobby Lane is one of the most historic figures in the state of Texas's history when it comes to football. He was a star quarterback at Highland Park High School, 2-sport star, actually. He played baseball as well, but football was really where he made his name, playing in the same backfield as the quarterback with his running back best friend, Doak Walker, who you probably know the name Doak Walker. But he and Doak Walker had massive success there at Highland Park, and Bobby Lane became a little bit of a Texas high school football legend. And when you think about Highland Park High School, think about some of the names that have come out of there as big-time athletes. Scotty Scheffler, Matthew Stafford, Clayton Kershaw. It's a pretty historic program for athletics. And Bobby Lane's reputation within that school and within that program is about equal. And so he is a big-time star and somebody whose name is still kind of spoken in hushed tones in Texas high school football circles some 80 years later. He only increased that legend by going to the University of Texas, where he became a massive star there as well, and had his number 22 jersey retired, punted for them, played quarterback, and his signature game probably occurred at the Cotton Bowl, where this Cowboys-Steelers game was taking place in 1960. In the 1946 Cotton Bowl, Texas was playing Missouri. They beat Missouri 40-27, and Bobby Lane was responsible for every single point that day. He had 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 passing, caught 1, and then kicked 4 extra points. There's really not been a game like that since, not just in the Cotton Bowl, just in general. That's not a very common performance right there. And so Bobby Lane just kind of added to his legend there during his time with the Texas Longhorns, and for his part was a member of the College Football Hall of Fame and one of the initial members of the Cotton Bowl Hall of Fame. So Bobby Lane, the Highland Park hero who went out of the University of Texas and became a hero there and became a legend there on the Cotton Bowl field where he became a legend, they're going to pick the Cowboys as their rooting interest over the hometown hero, the guy who has just been one of the gods of the sport for the Dallas area for the better part of 15 years. Nope. That's not going to happen. This was a Bobby Lane crowd that the Cowboys were running into the first time they played football. Now, Bobby Lane was in a little bit of a different spot in his career. It was his 3rd season as the quarterback for the Steelers after getting traded from the Lions. And it was his 13th NFL season. He was almost 34 years old. His time in the league was starting to come to an end. But on that day, he dipped into some of that Cotton Bowl magic that he had in the past. and showed that off for the Dallas crowd. This was actually the first time that Bobby Lane had played in the Cotton Bowl since 1948, his senior year at Texas, or 1947, his senior year at Texas. And that was a loss to Doak Walker, his best friend, and the SMU Mustangs. It was the only loss he had during his senior season and derailed his chance at, a national title that year. And so very big game, looking for a lot of vengeance. Dallas actually got out to a big start in this first game, despite the, challenges of going against a crowd that was probably rooting for the other team's quarterback. Their quarterback that day was Eddie LeBaron, a long-term veteran in the NFL, somebody who made 3 Pro Bowls with Washington, and somebody who was the smallest quarterback ever to play the position at like 5'7", 165 pounds. But he gets out to a fast start, throws 2 touchdown passes in the first quarter. Dallas goes up 14-0, kind of shocks the Steelers a little bit. And there was a nice little back and forth for the rest of the game. You get into the third quarter, and Eddie LeBaron throws a big 54-yard touchdown pass to put him up 28-21. And you start to feel a little bit like, hey, they might win this first game. And then Bobby Lane reminded everybody there just exactly who he was and the type of player that he could be, especially when he's in that stadium in the state of Texas. So Bobby Lane, ensuing drive, throws a 49-yard touchdown pass, ties it up. And then in the final minutes of the fourth quarter, he hits a big-time 65-yard touchdown pass as the pass rush is coming in and clobbers him. But he gets the ball off, completes it, touchdown. Steelers win that game 35-28. And while it was a valiant effort from the Cowboys, it was the first in what would be a number of losses in their inaugural season as the Dallas Cowboys. They went 0-11-1 in 1960. So then 1961 rolls around. A little bit of deja vu for the Cowboys. They are looking for their first victory as a franchise. They are welcoming the Pittsburgh Steelers to town in the opening game of the season, and they are standing on that Cotton Bowl field, looking across to the other sideline, and they are looking at Bobby Lane as the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers again. But Dallas does have a little bit of a boost in terms of crowd support this year, and they're growing some Cowboys fans in the year that they had existed, but Bobby Lane was still a big deal. And so the Cowboys came into that game with a little bit of home support for 2 players of note. One was their starting quarterback that day, who was Don Meredith. Now, Don Meredith was in the second year out of SMU. He had not played in the first game against Pittsburgh the year prior, but he was on the roster. But Don Meredith was a 2-time All-American at SMU, had played his entire collegiate career playing home games there in front of that same Cotton Bowl crowd, was absolutely beloved on the campus of Southern Methodist to the point that students there, when he was there, would call it Southern Meredith University. So he is a big-time name in the DFW community. And then the other one was their first-round pick in the draft that year, and that was Bob Lilly, who had played at TCU, made a big name for himself there, was an All-American in 1960, and was the 13th pick for the Cowboys in the 1961 draft. So this was his first game, another chance in front of the home crowd, and a guy who would one day become Mr. Cowboy. So with Meredith and Lilly, that kind of brought some more local interest in the Cowboys than just being from Dallas, and waited a little bit for them with Bobby Lane coming to town again. But even though it was Don Meredith who started this game and was kind of the hometown kid and the hometown favorite, it was the veteran Eddie LeBaron who ended up being the hero of this day. So Eddie LeBaron comes in. They were rotating out snaps at different points during the game, but in the final few moments of the game in the fourth quarter, Eddie LeBaron comes in, drives the Cowboys down the field, ties the game up with just under a minute left, and it feels like there might be a chance to actually win this game, but there's that fear that exists for the Cowboys knowing Bobby Lane's on the other sideline and about to drive down the field and, make a big show in front of his hometown crowd again. Except not this time. Bobby Lane throws his 3rd interception of the game, and the Cowboys get the ball back with 22 seconds left at their own 43-yard line. Eddie LeBaron comes back out, steps under center, drops back, looks deep down the left field sideline, and completes a 41-yard pass inside the red zone, sets the Cowboys up for a game-winning 27-yard field goal. And the Cowboys get their first victory of their entire existence, and they get it in a big way in front of this home crowd that was so enamored with Bobby Lane the year before, and against this Pittsburgh Steelers team that upset them in what they felt like was a really good opportunity to win their first game as an NFL franchise. And there's a lot of other stuff that goes back to this. The Dallas Texans, when they first existed in 1952, before they folded in the middle of the season, the only owners that voted against the existence of the Dallas Texans in 1952 was the Rooneys. And so there's a lot of history here with the city of Dallas and Pittsburgh and the way that these two cities have interacted as football teams and football franchises. And it goes back to really early days before either one of them were even close to the types of franchises that they would become. Pittsburgh was nobody in 1961, and the Dallas Cowboys were less than nobody in 1961. But there was already a little bit of this building rivalry all the way back to those early years, those first two games, and it kind of laid the foundation for what would become this really historic rivalry.